let's talk about bipolar. Esta la cerveza número uno. The weird thing about a language that has so many specifically gendered terms, but certain words only have a certain ending that sounds one gender or another, and it's not a uniform set of rules. So what you end up with is cerveza. You don't say uno cerveza, you say una cerveza. There is no cervezo, cerveza. Una cerveza. That's feminine. Esta is neutral. Esta, la cerveza. Pero what happens, pero means but. What happens is when you say the number one, it is always with an O. And so when you say number one, that must be masculine. Esta la cerveza de número uno. Neutral, feminine, feminine, neutral, masculine, masculine. Weird. There's a shape and a pattern to it. It's interesting. What is bipolar? It is a mood disorder. It is not a personality disorder. There are effects on the personality, to be sure, but it is not a disorder of the personality. It is a disorder of the mood. The fundamental part of it is that there is a mood swing. You don't have a mood. You have where are you at in the mood swing. I personally have a hard time even comprehending moods other than that. But there are people that don't have this. It's one thing that your mood is like, I guess the best I can think of it is like, you're in the mood to make some money, you're in the mood to have fun. Someone wrecks your mood and you're like, oh, you motherfucker. You get angry, right? But with bipolar, there is a cyclical change over time that is independent, generally speaking, from anything else. So, like cats have moods, their tail indicates their mood typically. Middle is kind of a down tail is usually a bad, not sad so much. That's mid tail. What the tip of the tail is doing, the part with the stripes, is a different part of the semaphore of cat language. Growing claws, though, in my leg. But you see, upward, that's excitable. This part here, if it stands up as well, is a positive mood. If it goes neutral, you're excited, but you don't know. And then this part goes, but I don't like it. Down is bad, up is good, middle is neutral. And they have this part, and this part, which can then do this. Because I've seen cats do the pissed off thing, but they're kind of playing, and there's an ultimate final curl back up on their tail. But this is dependent on interaction, dependent on stimuli. A mood swing is typically something that is dependent only on internal brain chemistry or whatever. However it is that that actually works. I'm not sure that anybody has a real idea of it. If they do, they're not really sharing it. It hasn't come out that there's a specific anything. All I know is that the best mood stabilizers from personal experience as well as academic research that I've read about are anticonvulsants, which means that there is some type of like seizure-ish thing going on in the mood centers, which I believe is like the hippocampus. But you have two of those. You have two hemispheres in your brain. So maybe it's a dissonance between, who knows? People that have bipolar typically inherit this. It is not something that is acquired. It is not trauma-induced. And again, it is not a personality disorder. It is purely a mood disorder. The personality traits that may be generated as symptoms of things like mania or depression, because people come to know, you come to accept what people talk about, they have come to know, and your pathways kind of grow in a way that accepts this. But the mood itself, for a non-rapid cycling bipolar, is going to be months long. Stuck in the dump of emotional mood depression. Hyper-focused on who knows what. With the depression part of it is, and you can probably tell from my past videos, I've been in some depression. When a person just has depression, they are depressed all the time. There is no coming out of it. There is no sunny days feel better. Sunny days are dark and... With bipolar, the depression part of it is simply, I think of it as a sine wave or a circle, however you want to look at it. It's an orbit of mood with seasons, or it is a sinusoidal archetype that the actual mood and its movement can be quite complex, but roughly will follow the general idea, even if certain, depending on your circumstance, certain positions either around that orbit or whatever can be prolonged. With a regular non-rapid cycling bipolar situation, the person is going to experience months, half of a year of just down, and some parts of up, and some little bits of down, maybe some parts of up before down. And those are like seasonally affected only. That is your long-term non-rapid cycling bipolar, unless you are a bipolar type 1 where you're having delusions bordering on schizophrenia, which I sometimes experience, but bipolar type 1 is typically a very long, slow mood swing. And I don't experience that. Now, type 1 has delusions including like visual hallucinations, real obsessive compulsive memory issues with a full-born hallucination of a photographic memory recall of having done a thing that you didn't actually do, or vice versa. And type 1 is, I think, typically fairly rare, often misdiagnosed as schizophrenia or other things. Type 2 is the most common. Most people that have a type 2 bipolar may be also seasonally affected, which is it's a natural thing. There's some hypothesis that it may be related to hibernation. I find that to be the case. In and amongst that, however, a rapid cycle bipolar typically will have, rather than half a year down, part of a year up and some down and some up and then back to the big down, you will periodically have maybe a month or two, 6 weeks to several months, 4 months maybe, of down with a punctuated up. 6 weeks, couple months, back down. And so it goes. As well as seasonal affective on top of it, which just kind of makes it like a randomizer to increase the number of potential permutations of mood state You could think of it as a slider, but you also have to think of it over time. So it would be a slider that is like shh. And in some places it would be like either going like this, like at the top and bottom, or seeming to just sit at the middle and go like this, but actually be touching everything. Type 2 rapid cycling typically involves either extreme mood fluctuations or things like hypomania, or what you could call hyperdepression, which is a slightly above depressed but below your baseline. What the baseline is if there's an imaginary zero where the amplitude of the mood swings tends to center around this, it would be, if it was a circle, the center of the orbit. And that's why the circle falls apart. The sine wave is a little better way of looking at it. The baseline is if you've become medicated for a long enough period of time to just recognize the lack of mood swings, the lack of all these things, you can establish for yourself in memory and in mind what it feels like to just not have that. That's your baseline. Oftentimes, you notice the depression. You don't so much notice the mania because of euphoria. And there's transitional periods between the ups and the downs and the downs and the ups that include things like euphoria, where you feel yourself coming out of it. You pass the baseline and things are doing good and you're feeling all right. And if you're lucky, you get a hypomanic plateau where you're a little bit elevated, you're perfectly functional and really honestly good to go. You don't so much notice it like you do the depression, but sometimes you're like, fuck, this is great. And you're thankfully not even higher where you just skyrocket up into full-on mania, lunacy, delusion. Not just delusions of things like grandeur or persecution, but that you are a divine being. And, which I've also experienced. The hypomania is typically a better state, but there are consequences to this. There are little mini fluctuations that can occur during a hypomanic plateau that ultimately can lead to a real drop-off. And it doesn't necessarily always lead to a reverse plateau where there's kind of a less deep depression, where you're able to focus, but, definitely are aware of the fact that you're below your baseline. Which I suppose is better than being completely in the dumps. The bottom of the bottomless pit sucks. It sucks. There is another that when I was diagnosed in the mid-2000s, I want to say it was probably maybe 04, 05, I think, that I was diagnosed. It was given to me as type 2 bipolar rapid cycling with obsessive compulsive tendencies. Not the same thing as obsessive compulsive disorder or obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which are two completely different things and are also completely separate from bipolar with obsessive compulsive traits. Some of the traits are a tendency to misremember whether or not you did a thing, and sometimes a little particularness and attention to detail, which comes from other factors that are part of the mania and sometimes the depression, but are not actually things where you become obsessive compulsive is a whole other. It's a talk for another time, not worth getting into because I'm not as with it, but it's very different. It's not what people think. So that was what I was given, but my mood swings could be extreme, and not just extreme in the amplitude sense, but in the frequency and rapidity of them. And eventually, in the process of being diagnosed, the therapist I was going to pulled a book off the wall and said, hang on, flipped to a spot, looked at a couple of things, and said, okay, continue. And thankfully, I was able to get diagnosed, and shortly after that, within a year, the next revision of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, DSM, had a revision. I believe it was the 4th revision, moving toward the DSM-5. And what this included was ultradian cycling bipolar. And so what it is I can, under low stress, what you could call perfect circumstances, have a regular rapid cycle bipolar where you're kind of down for a bit, you're kind of up for a bit. And if you're under extreme lack of stress, just doing good, nobody's screwing with your mojo. You can oscillate just between the plateau and the shallower depth with some regularity. And it's manageable, it's predictable, it's tolerable, it works. When you're up, you have ideas, you're chipper, you're good to go. You have energy, and when you're down, you're not completely drained, but you're definitely able to focus on things you need to focus on. When you're up, your mind races. So even at the plateau, like, you're thinking, you're going, it's good. And as long as your nutrition's good, as long as your diet's good, and your stress level is moderated or non-existent, you'll stay like that. It'll just be fine. When times of extreme stress come, it's like somebody turns it into a wheel of fortune and goes bzzz and spins that fucker. Another way of looking at it would be your mood becomes a point on a sinusoidal graph, but what's actually happening is that it's a paddle ball, and they're just like banging a paddle, and sometimes it hits the paddle, and sometimes it goes all the way up and all the way, like, don't always hit the paddle. Sometimes it's a boom, 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 boom. And the person experiencing this is just like, oh, God. And the rapidity of it, the frequency, rather than months or weeks at a time. Oh, you might be thinking, oh, what, like an all-day thing? Keep going. Okay, like a couple a day? Keep going. Holy shit, how many times a day, bro? I can't count them. Not when it's happening. Oh, Jesus shit. How often then? You want to know? Do you really want to know? Anywhere from once an hour to every 15 to 20 minutes. During that time, of each of those intervals of time, a full sinusoidal mood swing. It could be plateaus and shallows. It could be extreme. It could be ping pong freaking paddle ball for 15 minutes, mixed states, the most dangerous. It could be that seems like it's just top and bottom, could be like, looks like it's at the middle, but it's obviously hitting everything. And through that, on top of that, there are longer term mood swings going on that are discernible. So it could be part of, depending on the day, the time, the mood, how things are going, circumstances, right? That there is a long, slow, sinusoidal motion. And in that motion, there are mood swings. And sometimes under extreme stress, those mood swings will go all the way up to mania and all the way back down to the bottom before continuing to follow. And other times, it will be moving so fast that the mind's racing ability is only able to keep up fast enough to provide a zoetrope effect. It's one of those animation machines where you have a little strip like a flip book in a line, and you spin it on this device, and the spacing of the little slots that let you see through it are timed, kind of like a projector shutter, so that you'll really only see one. I mean, you can look and see the other ones running too, but it'll all be one frame behind the next of whichever one you're looking at. And moods can move so fast that if you're able to at least keep yourself up, if you're in a high point on the long, slow part, you can zoetrope where your mood is, and that can shift itself as well. Welcome to hell, he said. Because then you can be in the middle of mixed state, extreme highs and lows of amplitude of mood, while following a general mood swing, and simultaneously have this mood zoetrope slow itself to wherever the hell it feels like being on the spectrum of mood, without regard to the actual mood state. at extreme stress. So when I overcame my own anxiety to simply ask a question, the result was somebody taking a hammer to my balance. That was me. I did it to myself. The psychic sensor, the Iceman of the brick wall of the can see it, but you can't get close. That I transmogrified, transmuted, and then cock punched straight out the pelvis. That was me too. It's all me. And it's just imagination. It's not like voices existing. I generated this scene for the purpose of intention. Because I knew there would be consequences for the real life application of such. The ultradian repercussion has been an extreme ultradian mood swing. It's alchemy. Equivalent exchange. Thankfully, most of the delusion does not have time to form. That is apparently a longer-term mania thing. And as long as the zoetrope is not stuck at the high point of mania, regardless of wherever else the mood happens to be at in the course, the delusion does not have time to form. It is a rot of rational ideas not used, apparently. Hyper-rational. That's where paranoia comes from, I suppose. So at least when it's ultradian, the majority of the delusion does not form. However, the problem of ultradian rapidity is that it can all come to resemble a mixed state episode. And if the zoetrope goes to mania, don't be surprised you got a maniac on your hands. That's only in the most extreme of stressful times. And I don't know, it's one of those things that for me, I resent it ever being a feeling. There's a lot of emotions and moods that I feel that I totally resent ever being made to feel. And only a few of them have to do with my mood swings. Other ones just have to do with people who don't know about nor obviously care about things like an ultradian cycle bipolar causing a person under extreme stress to become a maniac because of the rot of unused rational thought. Isn't that wild? Isn't that wild? Another aspect of bipolar is that because the mind is always racing, it is a fine-tuned, well-exercised muscle, as it were. And people who are in control, there is no in control. People who are able to surf the mood, people who are cognizant of their bipolar, are able to become even more thinking, more thoughtful, more rational if they like. That's why so many creative geniuses turn out to have been bipolar. And in some cases, it's also a matter of you're born in this state that is a natural tendency to enlightenment, if you are able to navigate it. I passed the baseline on the way home, I believe, and it was without regard to the dog shit night that I had after a dog shit long day that didn't pay out. I was depressed. I should be angry. Instead, I'm mildly not terribly unpleasant, but definitely above the baseline now. So that's where the kiosk is also at. As it happens, as it changes, I guess I'll document that as well for a bit. Maybe that'll be interesting.